Greetings from Australia. My name is Ruth and I am an Australian immigration law practitioner here in Australia. Well, in today's video, I would like to share with you 4 things you must know in order to apply for Australian citizenship. Now, please do not treat the contents of this video as legal or migration advice, but we know that the contents in this video will help you. So let's get started. What are the 4 things you must know before applying for Australian citizenship? Number 1, know which pathway. Now, there are a couple of different pathways in which you can apply for Australian citizenship. The first one is called application for Australian citizenship by conferral. So what that means is that you generally have to be a permanent resident of Australia before you can apply for citizenship by conferral. So that would also mean that you would have probably gone through one of the visa subclasses, whether it's a family visa, whether it's a work visa, a skilled visa, etc. If you meet the permanent residency requirement, then usually you wait another 12 months before you can apply for citizenship by conferral. The other pathway to apply for Australian citizenship, I call this the fast track option, because you get to skip the permanent residency option. You don't have to become a permanent resident. And that's if you are, if you apply under the descent category. So what that means is one of your parents or both of them were Australian citizens at the time you were born. So if at the time you were born, either one of your parents or both of them were Australian citizens, then potentially you may be able to skip the permanent residency option and jump straight into Australian citizenship. And I think that's pretty great. In some cases, immigration will accept applications for citizenship for applicants who meet certain deadlines or certain criteria, such as our PNG friends or British nationals from the UK, but usually you have to meet certain date requirement. So for the newer applicants, I think it is usually quite difficult to go under that pathway. So most applicants will still have to undergo the permanent residency pathway before pursuing citizenship. So that's the first thing, you need to know the pathway. Now, there's also an avenue in which people holding permanent residence in Australia can apply for citizenship under the older than 60 category. Now, 60 is not old, it's very, very young in my view. But the benefit of applying as an aged person is that you don't actually have to sit for an Australian citizenship test, which is fantastic, because I think whenever I tell my clients about, oh, you have to sit for a test, everyone just sort of freaks out. But it's actually really, it's very doable. It's not difficult as long as you study for it. I actually went through the test myself years ago. But yeah, usually if you apply for citizenship, you have to apply for it, go for an interview, sit for the test, and then attend the ceremony before you become a citizen. But if you're applying as a person who's older than 60, then you will be eligible to skip the test and apply for it, go for the interview, and then just go for the ceremony. Okay. So the second thing you must know before applying for citizenship is that you have to ensure that you meet the residency requirement. This is so important. So usually you have to show that you've lived in Australia for 4 years immediately before you apply, and you have to have held a permanent residency visa for at least 12 months. And usually in that time frame, you cannot be out of Australia for a certain number of days within that 4 years, and usually within the 12 months before you apply, you cannot be out of Australia for more than 90 days in order to meet the residency requirement. Now, in some cases, we have clients who work offshore, and it may be for a specific company, but so pretty much they do a fly-in, fly-out, which means they would go to work offshore because they have to, but they'll come back home. This is where their spouse and their children live this is where they bought a home, this is where they pay their taxes. So in some cases, if you fit into the specific criteria, you might be able to claim an exemption, which means you don't actually have to show that you've met all the 4-year requirement. And if accepted, you will be eligible to still go ahead and apply for Australian citizenship. So there are a couple of different scenarios, like for example, if you're a sports person, or if you hold like a GTI, global talent visa, but there are also specific requirements that you have to meet before you can apply. So if your case is a little bit complicated and you're not too sure if you meet the residency requirement, just contact us. You can shoot us an email and we'd be happy to assist. So that's the second thing. So the third thing you must know before applying for citizenship is the character requirement. Now, this is so important because we've seen a lot of applicants who have met all the different requirements. They've gone through a long haul of, going through the visa, permanent residency process, and that, in some cases it would have taken them 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, or even longer. And when they get to the citizenship requirement, they notice that they haven't actually met the character requirement. So this could be, for example, if an applicant was granted permanent residency and after that they got into trouble with the law, whether it's, a particular charge, whether it's a violence order, whether there's a grievous bodily harm charge or something like that. But generally, in some cases, immigration can waive the requirement, and that would really depend on how long the offense was committed, how long ago the offense was committed, and if the person has turned over a new leaf. So they will look into mitigating factors, like did you contribute to the community, your employment, did you work, were you a loyal employee, did you show up on time, things like that. But usually if you go for a police check and nothing shows up, you should be pretty all right. But at the time you fill out the form, you actually consent. Some clients don't know that, but they tick a box and there is a consent button to say that you give the Australian Immigration Authority to conduct a police check about you. And that's a federal police check. And so it's important to know that it's a federal police check, it's not a state's police check, because sometimes when you look at the states, not all records will show. So it's very, very important that you meet the character requirement. In some cases, if you don't meet the requirement, you may be able to still proceed forward and claim mitigating factors. Ultimately, in other cases, immigration will say, well, you can try again, but we need to know that you are a person of good character and that you would be of benefit to the Australian community. And in such case, you might be able to wait a couple of years before trying again. So it's not like if you don't get citizenship, you'll be doomed forever. It just means that you have to do everything you can to redeem yourself. Okay. So that's the third thing you must know. And finally, the fourth thing you must know in order to obtain citizenship in Australia is use the correct form. So it's not rocket science to apply for citizenship, but the form, I noticed that at times it can be quite complicated because the forms are designed in such a way, where immigration captures certain details. For example, they'll say, where were you born? What was your mom and dad's date of birth? So they ask for very specific information, and most clients will be able to answer them without any issues. But I've also had situations where some of our clients can't, or rather they weren't able to produce specific dates, For example, if they're 80 years old at the time they apply and their parents are no longer around, and they were born during the war period, so they don't have like a birth certificate, they don't know when their parents were born. So with things like that, that's a little bit more complicated. It is always really important to supply true and correct information, because if you supply information that's incorrect, then you can be refused your citizenship based on the fact that you've provided false information. So what we normally do is we always advise our client to fill out specific forms to explain as to any information that may not be fully consistent, and that will hopefully get our clients through the line. So it's so important to use the correct form, provide the correct information, and be very honest in your application. Obviously, you have to pay the fees to the application. And finally, and this is the most important one, submit supporting documents. It's all about the evidence. So if you say that you've lived in Australia for the last 4 years, and you think, oh, well, they know about it anyways. Well, yeah, they sort of know, and they can conduct like a search, like a movement record to see where you are. But to avoid undue delay in your case, it is your obligation to provide as many documents as you can to show your continual residence in Australia. And also to give immigration, I usually advise my clients to say, okay, if you've gone overseas on certain dates, just let them know, where you've visited. You might want to come up with a sheet of paper to say, okay, here is when you came to Australia and this is the visa. Next, you applied for residency and you received your visa on X date, and then, and you've lived here for so long. So it's important to provide immigration with the picture, the full picture as to your residency here. And usually they'll ask for things like tenancy agreement or a mortgage for the house or a deed of the house, utility bills like gas bills or water bill rates, etc. Employment records, or notice of assessment, which is, the yearly document that the Australian Taxation Office sends to you. So these type of documents they're official, and they're usually able to support your application. Use the correct form, ensure you pay the fees, ensure you submit the supporting documents at the time of application. So to summarize, the 4 things you must know in order to attain Australian citizenship is: number 1, know which pathway you apply under. Don't apply under the wrong pathway, choose the right pathway. Number 2, ensure that you meet the residency requirement, and if you don't, find out if you meet the exemption requirement. Number 3, you must meet the character requirement, and they know everything. Number 4, use the correct form, submit supporting documents, and pay the fees. So I hope that today's video has provided you with a brief guidance as to what you need to do for your Australian citizenship application. If you're not too sure about where you are and you have some doubts about your application, please don't hesitate to contact us on the email address below. And just note that the information here is not to be treated as legal or migration advice, because each case is different. And so if you need help, just let us know and we'll be happy to assist. Well, otherwise, thank you for your time in watching this video, and we wish you all the best in your Australian citizenship pursuit. Thank you.